Are you a leader in customer success, pre-sales, professional services, support? Do you work behind the scenes and roll up your sleeves to make sure that customers are happy? Renew. Then this is for you. Welcome to the GSD Podcast. Welcome to the GSD Podcast. Getting it done. Services, success, and software. We'll talk with the pros that have been in the trenches, getting service teams off the ground, launching new types of groups to service customers, or running agencies that don't have a product attached to it. For the pros, by the pros. This is the GSD Podcast, and this is your host, Jeff Kushmerek.
Hi there, this is Jeff Kushmerek from the GSD Getting Services Done podcast. Welcome back. I had the chance today, I'm actually sitting in Hudson, Mass, where Richard Banfield has a new business. He still has Fresh Tilled Soil, but he created a new type of office shared location. And it's beautiful. If you know Richard, it's exactly what you would expect. There's fantastic furniture. Everything is just spaced appropriately and elegantly. And not only that, and we touched on this in the podcast, is he's a big believer in community. And we sat down, had a nice lunch. Other people here in the space came over. We were chatting with a chef and a videographer and a CrossFit trainer and some other people as well. And it was just, he's really doing a great thing out here for people that like to do the co-working thing, don't want to work directly in their houses, might be remote, but they also don't want to go to a space that is incredibly loud, fishbowl-like, and the only thing that's really thought about in those places are the cold brew and the ping pong table. So highly recommend that. We got into so many things. Richard has been a friend, a vendor, a mentor, everything for me along the years. And we got into, it's funny, I had a lot of topics, and the topics really came to getting resolved around some culture and passion. But we definitely got into how to hire for your teams and how to be empathetic and let customers know that you care, how to scale, how to work distributed. There was a really long discussion that was super needed on the distributed workforces and how to do that correctly. And Richard has experience in that with Fresh Tilled Soil going remote recently. And just thought leadership, and we really got into new business acquisition a lot too. So there's a lot of things here. And then we touched on favorite podcasts and thought leadership things as well. And just a really great time. Richard's a speaker in demand, and I'm glad for the time. So sit back, enjoy, and enjoy the conversation. All right, so I am recording now. I'm here with Richard Banfield. And Richard, I thought I'd start this off by telling you a story that I've never told you, but I tell everybody about you.
Really?
So yes, exactly. And so as you might be aware, when I was at Bright Cove, I had a group that was designers and developers and whatnot, but the point here is I had designers, right? And so one of the designers one day was talking about something in a meeting. I'm like, hey, that's a great concept. And she's like, yeah, I just read it from Fresh Tilled Soil. And I was like, who? And she's like, Fresh Tilled Soil. And she's like, you should subscribe to their blog. I think you'd really like it. And I was like, oh, okay, sounds great. And so I subscribed to it. And I was like, these guys put out great content. I don't need them as a vendor, but I'm really glad I know of the service, right? Yeah. And so fast forward a few years later, I had a project where I needed some really good UX fast. And I don't know if I ever told you this. We had a friend at Atlas that connected us. I didn't even get two other vendors. I knew you were the guys.
Wow.
And we hit it off, and I said, that's it. And so when people talk about content generation, I always use fresh tilled soil. And when I was trying to get our marketing department, like, we just need to put out some thought leadership, which we're going to touch on later.
Mm-hmm.
I always use this example, and they're like, oh, wow. So there you go.
Yeah.
So keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah. It's funny because content creation was never a marketing initiative for us. It was always driven by curiosity.
Yeah.
We should talk about that thing. We don't know enough about that. Or there's some really smart people who know about this thing.
Yeah.
And we would call them and interview them, and eventually it became a podcast and a whole bunch of other things. But it was really just like admitting that we didn't know what the hell we were talking about.
Absolutely.
And then reaching out to the people who did and saying, hey, do you mind if we talk about this stuff?
That's exactly what this podcast is. I mean, we talked about a little bit before this, but I used to go off and I'd talk with all these people that we get, not as much as we should anymore, but we get together, we just talk about stuff. Yeah. How do you do this? How do you do that? And I view this podcast as, hey, maybe you just got promoted or dropped in, or you ran support and now you have a services group that needs to happen, and then here you go. Where do I find any of this? Like Quora? Like, I don't think so, right? Yeah. So hopefully that's what. But this is for, absolutely. I think you find so much out through breaking things, and we do a lot of that where we are now, where we walk in and we're like, oh well, we built this out and we made sure that we have all of these components. They're like, wow, how did you think about this? And we're like, well, we kind of found out the hard way because we didn't ask customers if they needed multi-tenancy until suddenly they're like, this is multi-tenancy, right? So things like that. So actually, why don't you give a quick history? Because I think we're going to title this like From Special Forces to Design Leader. But it's a fascinating turn of events that I'd love for you to get into a little bit. Not the big biography that we talked about, but for people to know sort of how it happened and what you're into now.
Yeah, I'm not sure if everybody goes through this, but I suspect that even people who think about their careers from an early age, you don't really know what the hell you're doing when you're 16 or 17 or 18. I mean, you're just so stupid. You have so little insight into the real world.
That's why we have liberal art majors.
That's right.
Which I was.
Yeah. And by the way, I highly value that stuff. Like, everybody should do philosophy. Everybody should do that kind of thinking.
Absolutely.
That's
so
what
being like,
for.
I'm a mechanical engineer. I'm going to ride this rail for the next 30 years.
Yeah. And there's definitely a place for the kind of the technical skill sets, but you should always start with just how to think.
Yeah.
And I was dropped into the army straight out of school. It was a requirement of living in South Africa, which is conscription, just like it is in Israel and other countries. And that was my first experience of the real world outside of school. And it was a great experience because suddenly it was, I became an officer, so there was that whole leadership thing.
Yeah.
But you really just find out where your limits are. You find out mentally, emotionally, physically where your limits are.
Right.
And it sets you up for this incredible kind of opening. Your mind opens to a whole different place. Yeah. That if you're maybe you want a more protected environment, maybe you could just go from school to school to school to career. You really don't always find out where
the hard parts are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And where the scary parts are.
Yeah.
And where you have to face yourself in the middle of the night. Like, that's, like, oh my God, this is who I really am, or I'm being asked to do these things.
I hadn't even thought about asking this, but you're always seem to me very calm, right? Mm-hmm. I'm sure there's sides, right? We all have that, right? Somebody doesn't put the toilet paper roll on or something like that, and suddenly, like, it's all gone. But dealing with those things, you find out, like, the hard stuff, right? And suddenly the toilet paper roll is not that bad compared to, like, maybe sleeping in sandy water or things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I it's not like you solve the problem. It's not like you know what calmness is and you can always be there.
Right.
But it's, the door is opened and you get a glimpse of it. I find this with meditation as well. You get a glimpse of something and then you go, oh, I know what it is. Mm-hmm. And I know where it is, and I know how to get there. Yeah. But it doesn't mean it's always on.
Right. So true.
Same thing happens with psychedelic drugs, actually.
Yeah.
You have the door opens, and you're like, oh, I see the thing.
Yeah.
But it's not like the problem to get solved.
Right. It's just a different approach on things.
You just know that there is a solution, and you know that it's available to you, and that gives you this opening, this
It's another event. Yeah, it was when you said the psychedelic drugs. I thought of that Mad Men episode where the really straight laced, what was the name of the white hair? Anyways, he accidentally took acid, and then suddenly it just had very different perspectives on things. And
so the army is a little bit like that. It kind of opens your mind, and then my experiences were very unpredictable. I let my career unfold without too much of a plan. Yeah. It's kind of like, no roadmap, really.
I'm aware of that scenario.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of people probably experience that, but they may tell a different story because they want their parents to believe that they actually know what they want, or they want the rest of the world, the society around them to know what they want. But a lot of us are just finding out, who we are and how we fit into things.
Right.
And I was very, very fortunate. I worked as a diving instructor overseas in a very, very remote location of the world. That was another way to kind of explore literally the depths of my being, physically and mentally. And then I thought, well, hang on a second, this could be a career. I could do this in a more formalized setting. So I decided I was going to become a marine biologist and studied biology.
Yeah.
And was disappointed that science, the way, I imagine science being more like National Geographic kind of science.
Gotcha, yeah.
And because I'd been working
you were actually doing it, and suddenly you're probably in like a lot of theory.
Yeah, and then it was like back in the lab and spending an enormous amount of time in the subterranean windowless lab, and I was just like, I don't know if I want to do this for the rest of my life.
Right.
And so, fortunately, had been exposed to some design stuff. It was the new era of computers. Mm-hmm. Everybody had a PC by then.
Right.
The web was just starting to make its presence felt, and I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. Got in there, opened up the first, I think it was like Windows Paint or something.
Oh, yeah. Oh my God, yes.
And it just kind of turned me on. I was like, I can do really cool stuff with this.
Yeah.
And
flying
people want it. Yeah. And and then people would phone me and say, can you make stuff? Can you make, whether it's product packaging or a logo or a small website or something like that? And we were all just trying to figure it out.
Yeah,
nobody knew what the hell they knew. There was
I know.
There was no operating manual.
Yeah,
and you would just find an HTML book and teach yourself that stuff. And
I know. I just
do it.
Suddenly Netscape communicators out there dealing with that stuff as well. Yeah. I remembered. Yeah. Oh my God. O'Reilly books. I probably put somebody through college with those things.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and you kind of just figure it out as you go along, and a lot of it is admitting that you don't really know, but at the same time you also have to somewhat fake it before you make it, because people are asking you to do stuff, and you're putting yourself in that expert position.
That's such a concept that let's get into that, because I have it written out here. But there's, I'll use the dichotomy word again, but there's like, you're faking it till you make it, but you want to show this sort of like, we know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
How do you, and I know you guys go through this, because the note that I wrote was that I first noticed this with you because I had always been working in services with a product company. Like, I can get anything done within Deca. We'll load the file in, or Brightcove will build video experiences for you. But I noticed you could go from context to context, and within 5 minutes, pretty much like, oh, you're going to do this. It's a marketplace model. You're going to do blah, 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 blah. And that's where I noticed that you were able to really pick up on stuff and then just kind of fill in the pieces along the way. Is that pattern recognition? Is it the fake it that you make it, or?
It's a deep sense of curiosity. So when you're truly curious about something, and I really mean truly, like authentically curious, then people come away from your conversations thinking, wow, this person knows a lot about that. But what you've really just done is ask an insane amount of questions.
Yeah.
And the perception is, oh, this was a conversation between experts.
Right.
Whereas it was really just a lot of insanely good questions.
Yeah.
And very often those questions are insanely good because they're simple and foundational.
Right.
Like, why does this work like it does? Explain to me how this thing works, or draw a picture. Get up on the whiteboard and show me what the ecosystem of these things is.
Like those 7 levels of why. Like, why do you want to do that? Well, because I want to put my kids through education. Well, why do you want to do that? Right. And then suddenly, like, oh my God, I got to really think about that now.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So it's not so much about presenting as the expert and then faking that expertise. It's mostly about saying there is a thought process, like an exercise of thought that we're going to go through together, and that feels like expertise.
Right.
So if you put any other profession in that seat, whether it's a doctor or a lawyer or anybody else, let's say you were meeting with a doctor and the doctor asked really good questions. That would expose you to how the doctor thinks, where that doctor's experience might be, and what they really care about. Right. And it's the same with anything.
Right.
So if you walk in and you pretend to know all the answers and you throw solutions around, then it feels more like you're selling a ware. Like these are my things and I'm going to sell them to you.
Everything's a hammer and a nail.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas when you go through the discovery process, that leads to a different kind of empathetic conversation, what psychologists call accurate empathy.
So empathy is the big theme that I just keep popping up to, and I think there is something about doing really well in this profession of professional services. If I think that empath is truly one of those traits that is needed to be successful, but also somebody that people want to work with.
Yeah, and it has to be accurate empathy, not the fake empathy. Because
what do you mean?
The fake empathy is actually fairly easy to learn.
Yeah.
And it's these little things like, I'm going to really listen to somebody. I'm going to let them talk all the way through before I ask my next question. Right. I'm going to repeat back what they said to me. You can learn those things without actually caring.
Absolutely.
Without actually really listening.
Yes, they're called sociopaths, Richard.
But that's what unfortunately happens, especially in the world that we live in.
Because everybody was told to solution sell now. Right. And it's like, well, you have to do that. Wait 5 seconds before you talk, but then wait another 5 seconds. And it may seem like painful silence, then that's the training, right?
Yeah. And then that went, solution selling went to challenges selling, where it was a little bit more active. There was kind of this coactive.
Yeah, a little poking.
Yeah, exactly. And
did you ever fall into that? Did you ever do the challenging?
So I've tried all of these things because I'm curious to see how they work.
Right.
But there's that core part of you that goes, this sounds like bullshit. Like, you would never have this conversation with a child or a wife.
Right.
Your wife, you were like, they would see right through you. So why are you having it with this potential client?
It's so funny. I do that to my daughters occasionally. I'm like, I'll sit down with my 11-year-old, put my hands on the table and be like, so tell me about your day, daughter. Yeah. Right? And she'll be like, what the hell is going on right here?
You're a psycho.
He's so weird.
Yeah.
That's what they say.
Exactly. So, the measure of this is, would you try any of this stuff with friends or your family? And the answer is ridiculously no. Like, there's just no ways you get away with it.
Right.
The stuff that does work, however, is that genuine curiosity or accurate empathy, where you're really, really, really trying to get into that situation that they're in through genuine dialogue.
Right.
And saying things like, well, yeah, I don't really understand what you're talking about because I've never been in your situation. Tell me more about that, or explain to me in a way that I would understand. Are there metaphors? Are there analogs? Are there ways that you can explain this to me? And you just express your ignorance,
right,
in a way that's not like, well, I'm ignorant and I don't care about you, but rather like, I am truly misunderstanding this because I haven't been in your situation.
Absolutely.
And if you keep talking and I keep asking questions, maybe there's a point at which those things will intersect and we'll know each other better.
Absolutely.
And so what we find, and I think this is a topic that you care about, certainly I do, prospecting and working with clients and acquisition of new work. If you make it about discovery and discovering what the true heart of the problem is or what the pain point is and nothing else,
right,
like you genuinely just want to know what the problem is and you ignore the fact that you've actually got a solution in your back pocket, you get to a place of empathy so much quicker than if you're just trying to force the conversation around to that moment where you can quickly insert your solution.
Right.
You said the key word, and now
I have. You said a platform. Well, I have something here for you.
That's right.
Absolutely. We're going to get back into empathy a little bit on the delivery and the customer success because I think there's some good models in there as well too. In the vein of like, hey, you just inherited this team or something like that. I've got a couple themes I love to ask everybody, and one of them is the sort of I'll put it in the frame of the product of the designers, right?
Okay.
Your team, everybody should know Richard's teams build brilliant UX and user experiences, UI. I mean, am I missing things as well?
Yeah.
And I think there's a big difference between the people that will work for an organization and work as consultants. We've done these a couple times before, and I've perhaps had some drinks in me, and I'll expound on it for a while with some biases and whatnot. But I have this sort of feeling about the care that people put into their work. And that might not be as much when it's sort of like, oh, I'm one of 15 designers in this group of 45 designers at this really large company.
Yeah.
But I'm starting to show my bias again. So, but it's definitely sort of like product team versus consultants, essentially. And I wanted to just chat about differences. How do you align with these people? Because I think you're probably having to work alongside people as well, too.
Yeah.
So,
very often we are trying to understand the why behind their organization. So if they're not aligned, it's probably because there's not a clear why. There's not a clear purpose of that organization. And so the first conversations tend to be, why does this company exist? I mean, these seem like really fun foundational questions,
right.
But why do you exist? What kind of impact do you think you're having on the world?
Right.
Why do you think the people that you work for and work with and partner with should care about that thing? And I think this already, but very few companies can actually explain
right.
in an accurate way or a lucid way what that looks like. And by lucid, I mean, I use that word very deliberately. I think it's easy to hallucinate what you think value means and what the potential vision of the company is. But really, it's just an idea or concept in your head or the CEO's head that they're trying to align everybody around. Where true vision happens is when somebody can take that hallucination and turn it into a visible thing. That's why the word is called vision. To actually visualize it so that everybody is looking at the same thing and saying, that's the destination. That's where we're going. How we get there is somewhat ambiguous because we don't control everything. But we have a very clear vision of where we're going. And that becomes the why. Then you find that if you're dropped into a new team or you inherit a new team and you can find that vision,
right.
or it exists already, everybody's super aligned.
Gotcha.
What I find, and this is something that's evolved over time, not something that I knew from the beginning, is that very often a company will have a clear vision for the company.
Sure. Go public. Right.
No.
Or are you talking like we're into to make people better lives with X, Y, and Z?
Exactly.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
But they want to have a clear vision of the product within the company. So let's say you're working on a particular thing that the company makes, or an enterprise version of the thing that they make. So the enterprise customer is different. What's the product vision for that? Gotcha. Like, how do you interpret what is at the highest level down to the level that's really relevant to the end user and to the people that are selling to that end user? Because product vision tends to be ignored. Well, we have a vision and we have a product strategy.
Right.
Well, nobody else knows that. It's an internal thing. It's not being expressed externally. And that's exactly the same as, a group of people. If that group of people has a reason to be, go back to special forces, like, look, the commander's intent is we're going to go and kill the bad guy. There's a particularly really bad guy, and we're going to go somewhere and kill that guy. And there's 15 people on a team to go and do that. That's the vision for the group.
Everybody knows the why.
Correct.
Absolutely.
That's the why. However, everybody in the team needs to know their role, and they need to understand the particular, I would call it, product vision for how they're going to then participate at each step. Because going from one place to another in order to get to that final destination is going to require different sets of skills.
Right. And
different people are going to be more important along that route. And as you figure that stuff out, you also need to be internally aligned. Like, oh, I know what you do. I know why you're here. I know why you're valuable. And I've got your back because of that.
Right.
All of that alignment stuff requires conversations and empathy and really just,
right.
what I would call micro alignment versus the macro alignment,
sure.
to the bigger vision.
Yeah. And I know, as I've been in the room where sometimes people don't get that and they're like, just draw the pretty pictures. I have the vision. It's all this, and I need some some designs, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I know you've bumped into this as well too. Do you have a good combatant, or do you just kind of get everybody aligning around alignment?
Look, obviously the vision is really important. You
Right.
do like, for me, the vision also has to be somewhat divisive in that it's got to be a strong enough vision that people can say, yes, this is for me, or no, this is not for me.
Yeah, they'll fight.
So, yeah,
right?
politics, right?
Yeah.
So,
But I mean, like,
like
yes,
this-
I really want this.
yes,
Yeah.
like I want this. I believe in this. I'll not necessarily die for it, but I'll go to the mat for this stuff.
Right.
And that's why.
And it could be, I'll perhaps give up resources and budget. I really believe in this.
Correct.
Things like that. So
Yeah.
in the end,
But it must be
operational
divisive.
sense.
Like you must. It's that the example I use is the classified ad that Shackleton used when he was trying to get people to come to Antarctica on this crazy this idea that he had, which was this was like 1906, and they were going to go walk from one side of Antarctica to the other, and the ad that he put in the paper reads like you're recruiting insane people. It says, listen, we're going on this trip. The chances of you of coming back are very slim. There's very little money. There's very little recognition for what we're going to do. And there's a good chance that something bad will happen along the way.
Right.
And 5,000 people signed up.
It's crazy.
and the reason why I think it's so good is because the 5,000 people that he absolutely needed for this to be successful were in that group. And then there was everybody else. And so a vision has to be divisive in the sense that it's got to say, look, here is what's attractive to a certain group of people, but not to everybody. Mm-hmm. Then, once you've established that, then it's a case of understanding what are the personal motivations within that group and how are they aligning with that? Why do they think that's important? Why do they think they care about that idea?
Right.
And then are you willing to invest in that? Like, is it worthwhile investing in that at an individual level? So when it comes to making the vision happen, it ultimately boils down to, yes, we've got this divisive idea that some people want and some people don't, but then there's an individual quality to it as well.
That's great. This will actually go really well into the next topic is how do you hire and find those people that can drive those? Because for a while, it's going to be you, right? Like this is how you operate, but then that doesn't scale. And you need to find people that can be a mini version of you or to take certain aspects of things like that.
Yeah. Again, I would use almost the same analog or metaphor for that. You need a divisive way to get people in and out of your organization. So maybe another good example is JFK says, listen, we're going to go to the moon. It's Rice University, 1962, and he's standing in the stadium, and he says, we're going to go to the moon. Half the people say, that's a great idea. And the other half are like, this man is insane. Like, we want nothing to do with him.
Right.
And I think that's okay. That's how you hire. Then people show up and say, I want to be part of that. And those are the people you can start recruiting and saying, yes, these are the people we want inside of our organization. But we also know who the people are that we don't want here. If they're here just for the paycheck, but they don't believe in going to the moon, well, that's not going to help. So if you inherit that, it's slightly different, right? Then you have to be divisive when you get there and say, look, you're here, but we're going to go to the moon. Do you still want in? Mm-hmm. Well, now we're going to go to Mars. Like, here's the new objective.
Good point. Yeah.
And find out who's in and who's not. And I think that's a really, really powerful way to hire because people then self-recruit.
Right.
They come knocking at your door and say,
I need to work here.
Hey, I've always wanted to go to the moon or Mars or whatever your objective is. I mean, those are really good examples because who the hell thinks that that's a good idea, right? Only a certain group of people.
Right. I see this real, you could point it to like successful products, but also successful people, sort of niche based, right? And niche, I know it sounds a little passe right now, but it is really that, this will do really well. And this group of people will love it so much that they'll do almost anything for it.
Right.
And they can't live without it.
Yeah. And we live in a world where there are enough people. There are almost 10 billion people on the planet. Yeah. You can have a very, very specific, focused niche product that only does one thing really well and be very, very successful at it. So,
That's great. How are you? This is always evolving for me. I go to sort of different ways. But a lot of people working for you before, career paths. Like, do you plan those out as in, here's a nice little group of chevrons and you're going to be here and then you're going to be here? Or I know some other people are sort of like, I have a different thing. I'm going to give you a title and people might not have heard of that title, but that's you. And just, I don't think there's a personal right, wrong way to do this, but I was just curious what your philosophy is.
I think I'm the wrong person to ask that question because I haven't really had a really clear path of where I wanted to go, except that there are certain people that I want to be around. There's a certain type of human that I share to work with. And I look for that in the people that I work with. I look for people who value team over individual.
Gotcha.
And I don't mean in a purely altruistic way, like, oh, I'm going to sacrifice everything that I care about just so that the team's good.
Right.
But I'm going to put my strengths and energies and skills to work so that this team does better.
Okay.
That's what I'm looking for. Again, that's not for everybody. It's It's not a great career path. But when I teach and mentor, I ask people, you can't do this on your own, right? Your career path is not an individual pursuit. It's a common pursuit amongst many, many people. You need supporters, you need employers, or you need to employ people in order to make your career successful. What are the ways that you describe that to yourself in terms of your efforts? Like, how do you make those connections? Is what you're doing useful towards that goal, or are you just selfishly pursuing a career path?
That's the useful thing. Yeah, that really hits it home for me because that's always it. You want what I say to everybody. If I'm interviewing them or, you walk into a new organization, you're trying to assess people, I tell people you always need to be the person, the guy, like, oh, we need Richard in the room for this conversation, right? And if you don't have that role inside your group or your organization, like, you might want to, see if there's something that you can pick up that makes you invaluable.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily mean in the like, oh my God, I'm going to get fired if I don't do this, but you need to feel the valuableness, right?
And it evolves as well. Like when you're super young and you're just entering into the workforce, those things are not necessarily going to be as philosophical as we're describing. It might be, look, I do need a paycheck. I got to pay rent. Right. And so you're willing to do certain things at that level. But eventually you start to see where you can be valuable and you can see where your skill set and your passion start to intersect. And passion's a weird word, but it's the things that you care about, the things that you want to spend time doing, even when they're hard. Like, that's the way I describe it. Like, I want to be working on things that are rewarding, even when they're crap.
Sure.
Like, rewarding for me, for the team, for the company. So I see less, just going back to an earlier point about the consulting mindset versus the, working in the company mindset. I think what consulting teaches you is that you're at service to other people's ideas.
Right.
So when you and I are working on a project and we're designing or developing an application, we're very often doing it in service of somebody else's vision. It's not our vision.
Right.
We're adopting that and we're making them successful and hopefully wealthy or whatever it is that they want as well. And that service mindset actually does work pretty well in a corporate environment. So if you went out of the service consulting mentality and went to work for a big corporation, you'd be like, oh yeah, I'm in service. I'm actually as long as you're in service to something that you care about, you can be super useful. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
The consulting mindset, and I've, when I talk to friends or just, meet new people and everything, I saw this when we had from Endeca, a bunch of the developers were like, that was a good run. I'm going to go work for a product company now. And like, those people are like unicorns because they're like, this sprint, nothing gets carried over to the next sprint. Like, because it's consulting mindset. Like, it gets done because we said we were going to do it.
Yeah.
And that's sort of my whole, that's my thing on the product versus consultants. But I really like that approach that you were talking about with the team and bringing the value, because that for me is a different way of thinking about that. I need to think about more instead of the like, you're here, I'm there type of thing. That was great. So let's switch topics a little bit. about we switched a little bit into new business acquisition. I don't want that to sound like let's talk about sales and now we get customers because like I think we're both of the same variety where like we want to bring on people because we like to help people do their next great thing, right? But we have to do it, right? It's a part of the job, and so. I know we've both tried a variety of different models out there, and some things work and some things don't. Where are you now in your understanding of sort of like, you know, I would like to get new customers. This is the approach that I'm going to take. I know you're a big networker. Are you more word of mouth, or you sort of have the marketing and the BDRs and then picking up the phones and like this? There's a lot of ground to cover here. So I was sort of focusing on.
Yeah. And of course, our experience is going to be relevant to consulting as a trade.
Yes.
So we've tried just about everything.
Yeah. Because not everybody is looking for a project, right?
Yeah.
You sound great. I might need you in 2 to 3 years.
Exactly. Yeah, we actually just closed a deal that took 7 years.
Yeah, never
7
give
years
up.
between the conversation and actual.
That's
close.
amazing.
Yeah,
that's great.
So because we're a curious group, because I'm a curious guy, we've tried everything. We've had all kinds of marketing and sales techniques and methodologies. There's a part of me that says you've got to do a little bit of everything.
Mm-hmm.
Although what we found works best for consulting is a little bit of thought leadership. It doesn't have to be a lot. You don't have to write 4 books like I did. You know, that's overkill.
Yeah.
You don't.
I call this the balanced portfolio, just like your financial advisor says.
I think it's important to express thought leadership in whatever way is appropriate. Maybe you have a podcast. Maybe you speak at conferences. By the way, that doesn't lead to nobody stands up halfway through your talk and says you're hired. But it does set up the opportunity for a conversation or create the awareness that's necessary.
Right.
So it's necessary but insufficient. What works tactically, though, on a day-to-day basis is reaching out to your clients or your prospects and saying things like, listen, I know that you've got a regular schedule of roadmap stuff that needs to be done. There's it's just keeping the trains on time, and we're probably already working with you on some of that stuff. What's the 1 or 2 things that you would love to give attention to that you can't right now because you're spending too much time on that?
This tactical issue. Yeah.
Like what's the moonshot that you would love to be working on right now, but you don't have the resources for?
This is fantastic. I'm going to write an email with the subject line that's "What's your moonshot?" I'm just kidding. I'm totally.
Yeah, well, actually, it's not far from the truth, because all you really have to say to somebody is, "What's on your roadmap that you care about, but that's not getting any attention?"
Right.
And it doesn't have to be the size of a moonshot, but it's normally something that people care a lot about. Like, we've done some discovery work. We know that there's this potential for something here, but we've got so many resources working on just reacting to the day-to-day that we're not really being proactive about this other thing. And then you say to them, well, why don't we do a week or 2 of pro bono work on that thing for you and see if that thing is truly as awesome as you think it is? Because maybe you're just in love with it.
Absolutely.
Maybe it's just, it's the girl across the street that you look through the window, you're like, oh my God, she must be amazing. But you've never really met her, right? You don't really know. So,
and then she goes inside her house and kicks her cat.
That's right. Yeah, she turns out to be a sociopath. So what we're saying is we're going to take our time and energy and work on a very discrete part of something that's not getting attention right now to find out whether it has legs and whether it's useful to you or not. And you're signaling a bunch of things there. One is, I care about the future of what you're doing. I care about your projects. But also, we're willing to spend our time and money on something that's probably more valuable than just marketing. Right. So instead of us spending a whole bunch of money on Facebook ads or whatever it is, we're going to spend money on you.
Right.
We're going to invest in you.
You're going to whiteboard a little bit. And it's funny because we do that as well. And some people, when I tell them that, they're like, aren't you afraid that you're going to just flush $10,000? Or even if the customer pays you a little bit for that, let's say like they're like, fine, here's $5,000, whatever number. I don't even want to get into that. But people will say, well, what happens if you go through this thing for 2 weeks and they paid you, this number of dollars and the thing's going to go nowhere? And I say, sorry, I should let you answer that. But I say, you just save them an incredible amount of money and heartache.
I mean, it just happened to us.
Oh.
Literally that exact scenario where one of our clients had a side project. This like
unprofessional, excuse me.
Phone blowing up. They had this little project on the side that they suspected would actually be pretty interesting, but they weren't sure. And we said, why don't we just run a design sprint on this and see what happens? Essentially, some of your listeners will know a design sprint is using the scientific method to take a hypothesis and build an experiment around it. You prototype something and you test it. And you either validate or invalidate that hypothesis.
Absolutely.
And what happened is we invalidated. And instead of them being super disappointed that this pet project of theirs was now dead, essentially, because we had proven that it wasn't worth working on, they were very excited that they weren't going to have to go through the trouble of spinning up in a team, finding the resources, finding the budget, delaying other projects so that they could do this. Because sometimes, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but very often these pet projects are executive projects. So what we would sometimes refer to as drive-bys. Sure. The CEO...
It would be great if we could do this.
...wanted to do something and kind of had a throwaway comment during meetings saying, wouldn't it be good if we did what the competitors are doing or what, get into this space, and inadvertently set this in motion as a project. And it happens all the time.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't mean that the CEO is in love with it. It just means that that's something that they were thinking about at the time during that meeting. And because that person's the CEO, everybody's
has legs.
The CEO said we have to work
on
on this piece of functionality, and so that's what we should find a way to do. So very often, and this is why this discovery as sales works so well, is because then what you're also, the final signal that you're sending is, we care enough that we're willing to spend our time and energy finding out where the things that you should care about are. And therefore, we're a good partner.
Right.
So we're helping.
And that's all you want. You want to be known as like, these guys are great. And they're like, oh, you must pay them $1 million. Like, no, not really. But like, they really helped us out. Like, that's fantastic, right?
Because ultimately, in my first ever sales manager, when I was like a junior sales guy, my first sales manager had this thing on her wall that just said, during good times and bad times, people do business with their friends.
Absolutely.
And what you've essentially done in a situation like that during that discovery or sales process is set up a level of trust that borders on friendship. Like, this person gives a shit about me.
Right.
And that's rare.
Yeah.
That's super rare. Yeah. Like, somebody, a stranger almost, went out of their way to take care of my business and my role and my responsibilities on their dime. Wow. Yeah. That's awesome.
That's also, and love to hear your thoughts on this. What I tell all of my teams, at some point in time, and preferably in the very first part of the project, you must be on site with the customer. You must be somewhere with the customer, because on every project, something goes wrong. It could be dramatic or not. And if you've sat there and had a glass of wine or some food or whatever, that just means so much more than just being, Slack message. Exactly.
Yeah, I think we front load our relationships with our clients where kickoffs are always in person. I mean, unless it's very, very difficult, and
it just can't happen, and you need to get the project.
Yeah, but we've been to like some strange places around the world to kick off projects. Yeah. And that face-to-face time is really important. It gives us the opportunity to establish rapport and chemistry. That's one of those opening moments. Like, it's back to the psychedelics. Like, you have an opening, you explore it. It's not the solution, but you now know what the solution could look like. Right. You now know who that person is, what they care about, the circumstances that they're in, the politics, the culture that they're in. Yeah. And being exposed to that gives you empathy.
Oh, you just hit that right on the. And if you don't mind for 1 minute, I just remember a few years ago I had a just brand new groups of project managers. They were like a year or two out of school, and it's just where we were as a company. And actually 3 or 4 years now, I'm getting old. But and I remember they were just visibly upset. And I'm like, well, what's wrong? And it's like, they were the customer was just yelling and screaming at me and was super upset. And I said, well, why do you think they were upset? Yeah. Why do you actually think they were upset? And they couldn't come up with it. And so, and I said, did you send your status reports out? Have you been updating Basecamp and all of these things? And the answer was no. I'm just so busy. And I'm like, well, I'll work on the busyness aspect because, that's on me. But this person made a decision to work with us or has been given a project. And if this project fails, this person's worried about
It's their job.
Their job. Their job. If you're dealing with a CEO, they could be out of business and the whole thing's failed, right? Yeah. So it's not because they said, I feel like tearing up a project manager today or a designer or a developer. It's, I'm nervous and
scared.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So
the empathy again, though, right?
Yeah. Fear is anger. Anger is fear. It's the same thing. It's just two sides of the same coin. So when somebody is expressing anger, they're expressing some fear towards an outcome, or that they are unable to do their job, or they're unable to reach their goal, or that you've let them down in some way and they trusted you and now their reputation is on the line. Right. So when somebody's shouting at you, it's normally because they're scared. And if you take that perspective, you can say, oh, you know what? I wonder what's driving that. And then you can get to a place of understanding a lot quicker.
Absolutely.
Or you can avoid it in the first place.
Yes. That's yeah, but I think just having the tool set to be able to deal with those things is because those situations, as much as you try to avoid them, right? They are going to happen. So that was great. I really appreciate you going over a lot of those sort of new business acquisition things because it gets, as with everything, a little deeper, right? And it gets back to that philosophy of trying to help and be doing the right things for your customers. One of the things that I will say struggle with. I don't struggle with it as much anymore. But, if people are growing groups and then suddenly, I know this happened a lot to me in the enterprise software world where suddenly they're opening up a sales team out in Seattle and LA and London. And then suddenly I'm dealing with a remote decentralized workforce. And I know this is a big topic for you. You actually now opened up a sort of a co-working space, which we would love to get into a little bit. But I know there's some very easy passe answers that can go out there, like, well, if you shouldn't have hired a person if you don't trust them to work remotely. But I feel like it's a little deeper than that, and there's cultural issues. So I'm just going to sort of hand it over to you and get your sort of perspective on remote working.
Yeah. So remote working is a huge umbrella, and it doesn't.
It's a good point. Yeah.
It doesn't actually reflect on the nuances or the subtleties of what people are working in. So if you've got, let's talk about some of the extremes. If you've got a 100% remote team, they're all distributed, and the original team was formed around that idea, then a company like InVision, for example, they're 850 people. They've never had an office, ever.
That's right.
So that's the original DNA of the company. The recruiting is, like I said, divisive. People are being attracted to that because of that situation. So there are people who are also more likely to be better at it just because of that situation. On the other extreme, you've got companies that have always had an office, and we saw this a few years ago with Yahoo, right? Yeah. They had an office, then people started to kind of filter out into the suburbs as they were working from home became possible, and then Marissa Mayer said, no, you've got to come back, and forced everybody to come back to the office. And by the way, that's happened multiple times at multiple companies. And the confusion that sets up is what ultimately hurts the efficiency or effectiveness of remote working. So this might sound extreme, but if your DNA is remote, be remote. If your DNA is office bound, be office bound. Right. What's insanely difficult to do, and we discovered this as well because we have been office bound for many, many years, and then we went remote, is that when you become remote, you have to set it up as if you're changing everything. So you have to take on the responsibility of doing that.
So it's sort of like we're creating a new DNA? Is that sort of what you're saying?
Exactly. Okay. Yeah, so the way I think about it, and I think the way that most people would not empathize with, but understand is it's like getting ready for an IPO. So the years leading up to the IPO need to be in that readiness state. I think it's called readiness, actually.
You've been through it for about 2 or 3 years. Like, we are now running like a public company. Right. Here's SAP.
Yeah. Right. And you need to audit yourself as if you're a remote company. You have to get experts in to help you understand what the things are going to be that you're going to have to deal with, the cultural changes, the logistical changes, the operational changes. You've got to practice. So, just like you would do quarterly earnings calls even before you need to do quarterly earnings calls in readiness, you have to do remote working. So we had a couple of circumstantial things that forced us to do it quicker. We had a pipe burst in our office. It was flooded for...
Yes, I forgot. Yeah, that was terrible. I was in right after that happened.
Yeah, and they were like, the building manager was like, listen, you're going to be out of here for a couple of weeks. And we said, you know what? Nobody comes in the office for a month. Everybody works from home. And that'll be our first step towards understanding whether this is something we could do for a longer period of time. So, and I know that other companies have actually tried to do this. There's a really good story about how, I think it was Shopify was planning to do that, and there was a gap between their two leases, and they were going to practice doing it. It never actually worked out, but they practiced.
Interesting. I'll look that up.
Remotely.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually an important thing. Is it can't be a light switch. You can't just turn it on and say, "Hey, today we're remote." You have to build towards that by switching your DNA. So it's the metaphor that I have in my head is if you've ever owned a cat, cats feel like they have two sets of DNA. One's domestic and the other one's feral.
Yes.
And they're super domestic. They hang around. They'll do whatever you want. And then you open the door and they're feral.
Yes. And I will kill a rabbit in front of you.
Yeah. And then I'm just like, I'm a wild animal, like suddenly. And you have to realize that, when you go from being remote or from being office bound to being remote, that's that DNA you have to find and turn on and then see how it works, because it may not work.
Right.
Not everybody's going to stick around. We had people who said, you know what, this is not for me.
I need to be around people. I need some sort of socio-cultural type.
And then there were also the much deeper subtleties that we won't go into. In fact, we're having an event here tonight to talk about it. But it's what about the people who need a little bit of both? They need a little bit of time with the team. They need a little bit of time on their own. What about, could we do co-working? Could we do coffee shops? Could we arrange to meet on site with the clients? There are all of those gray areas, just like the open office, closed office debate, which is total bullshit. There has never been an open office and a closed office. There's always some kind of gray version of it in between.
There's just cubes that are high.
And some version of that works for your culture and some version doesn't. And you have to spend as much time thinking about that and operationalizing for that as you would. And it's little details like every call has to be a Zoom call with video.
Yes.
You have to see each other.
Yeah. That just does not work. It's just
and you've also got to put into your calendar things like we're definitely going to talk to each other on a regular basis. We're going to see each other on a regular basis. So we're going to do in real life events that the team's going to get together, or that the squad's going to get together, or the entire company is going to get together on these dates, and we're going to do regular stuff with face-to-face communication.
That's smart.
Some of it's work, some of it's social, but you've got to do that just like you would your friendship.
Right. Yeah, you have to nurture it. Right. Yeah. It's because one of the first things you said, it's a relationship. So
yeah.
I think we'll switch off the business stuff, because I think we went through the whole thing, because you have a great way of being able to combine different things. And I just can't stop. First of all, I don't know if anybody heard, that was not a marble rolling across the desk. My stomach just kept growling.
We haven't fed Jeff today.
And so the other funny thing is...
We're going to send him out to kill a rabbit.
Exactly. And then the other funny thing I just kept laughing about is that we're kind of dressed similar today, which makes me think of, I don't even know if you remember this. Oh my God. Richard has been such an influence in my life in many ways that he doesn't understand. But one of them is that we had met where I was thinking about bringing Richard on as a vendor, as I sort of went into. And then I think the next night, or perhaps two, there was an event. There was a tug event. It was like a tequila night. Everybody was crazy. Yeah. Ooh, I don't want the E-tag. I don't want to be next to the NWA album. But anyway, everyone was hammered, right? And so I just remembered that I had put on my cool hip clothes, because I came out of wearing not a suit, but just without a tie, and then went into straight into you're one of 5 people at a startup or something. And so I don't think I necessarily had all the clothes to sort of look the part, and that shouldn't even matter, but yet here I am talking about it. And so I bump into Richard, and I'm wearing the same clothes that I wore previous 2 days, and I'm like, I swear to God, I have more clothes. I have a dry cleaning situation right now. And then the next day, I signed up for Trunk Club.
Good for you. Excellent.
Which is what I'm wearing right now, and I'm like, oh my God! And just the fact that I can talk about that,
That's great. That's
anyways, I just kept cracking up when I kept looking up at you. I'm like, oh my God, yes, the goal has been accomplished. But switching into some of the more fun stuff, I know we talked a lot about this previously, but it's been about a year or two since we've been in person. Mm-hmm. Biking still a thing?
Yes, I still race cyclocross, which is a version of cycling that reminds you more like a bunch of 12-year-olds with BMXs.
Oh, that's
doing
awesome.
Stupid things.
Yeah. You can still do that at our advanced ages.
Yeah, you can, and it's you're less likely to get injured, more likely to hang out with the people that you care about because it's a closed course, and unlike road racing, which tends to be much more strung out and over a long period of time.
Oh, okay.
So it's a very social sport, and I'm on the board of a local team, and we're actually, I think, one of the biggest teams in New England.
Yeah.
And super social, and we have a very active Slack group as well, and we meet together on a regular basis. So I find cycling to be one of those things that ticks so many boxes. Like, it's obviously enjoyable. It's another excuse to travel. Like,
yes, good point.
Yeah, I go to some really cool places to go and ride, but actually,
it's
like part of it.
That's
just
a great way. Some destination type of sports.
Exactly. But it's also super social, and a lot of the people on my team would be the kinds of folks that I would hang out with.
That's great
As well.
That's great. We tend to find and attract. There's just I don't want to get too much into the other world stuff, but there is that undercurrent that we always get attracted to.
Yeah.
Where are you on the coffee scene right now?
Ooh.
Because I remember nothing more I love than coming over to the office and getting like Richard to make me some
we had a lot of coffees. We had all of the coffees. So now, like you mentioned, we have a co-working space, and we have an espresso machine and drip coffee and all the different variations on that. I did have this very fleeting idea that I wanted to have my own kind of coffee shop situation in this.
I've envisioned that as well at times too. Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah, and then
maybe a little acoustic guitar in the background.
Right. And then I had the opportunity to actually interview some friends of mine who run 2 coffee shops and a bike shop, which is the other thing I want to do. And they run this in Girona in Spain, and I just saw how insanely difficult it is, and like how much time and energy you need to put into that off hours in order for the on hours to run smoothly.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't want any part of that. I just want to be the guy who sits and enjoys the coffee, not worrying about any of the other
Exactly. No, I went through a lot of this as well too. Oh my God. And so have you been pulled into kids soccer at all?
No. So I don't know whether this is fortunate or unfortunate, but so I've got 3 boys, a 22-year-old, a 16-year-old, and a 3-year-old. So that's kind of like a 401k.
Good spread. Diversification. Keeps you young.
The 22-year-old was mostly into cross-country running. And, which is actually a very different kind of sport than, say, the team sports like soccer and hockey and whatnot. And the 16-year-old is currently not too into any of those things.
Sure.
Loves riding his bike and
skateboarding
and stuff like that, but he's not like super into the team sport stuff, which is fine because I also went through that phase. I was like really into it. I was on the rowing team and played rugby, and then I was like, maybe I'll just do some of the individual things, like I'll ride my bike and I'll do some climbing and stuff like that. So I think he's going through a similar kind of experimentation. And then of course the 3-year-old, they're just insane, right? They're just like 100% energy all the time. Yeah. Started kicking the ball around and.
Great! Well, come to me if you have any tips on that. My daughters are, they're 5-6 days a week, club soccer, traveling across the country, and all that stuff. So
that's cool.
Yeah, no, and that's even driving down here. I'm like, I'm sure I've been down here on a soccer trip or something before, and we touched a little bit about. We're both just big podcast fans, right? Yeah. So I'd love to hear And I'm sure after people hearing you talk, if they hadn't heard you before, so what do you like to listen to when you pop the headphones on?
Yeah, so podcasts and Audible books are
Yep.
really my go-to.
Isn't that 2x speed, I believe you said?
Yeah. I'm not a particularly, even though I've written a lot of books, I'm dyslexic and I'm not particularly
I didn't realize
good
that.
with the written word and reading. So I trust spell check and editors to make me look.
Grammarly's fantastic.
Yeah. So when it comes to just kind of instant, how do you understand a market in half an hour? A16Z, I feel like is just
killing it. Yeah, I mean, and then you'll get topics who are like, I don't need to know about crypto for the next 3 weeks. But then they come out. There was a one API as a marketplace or something like that. It was about a year ago, and that was amazing. And they have some great. It's just really good stuff. Yeah.
So A16Z, and pretty much anybody they interview who has a podcast, I'll do the cross. Check and see what that's like.
Yeah, I bought that book, High Growth Handbook, after they had interviewed somebody. That was really really good. Especially, I'd recommend that for a lot of people.
There was one where the guy who runs Bulletproof Coffee, I can't remember the name of his.
Yes, I know who you're talking about.
He has a podcast, and there was a cross
pollination.
So I found out about him.
Dave Asprey.
Thank you. I'm not sure I like his style of interviewing, but I do like his guests. And so
I'll check it out.
Like a way to introduce me to new people.
Sure.
Michael Gervais, is it Seeking Wisdom?
I have not. I see the title now. I did not know the name when you said it, but I saw when you said Seeking Wisdom. I've seen that title pop up. And
so he is Finding Mastery. Finding
Mastery.
Yeah,
I like that title.
So he is a sports psychologist and a high performance. He works for the Seahawks and has the most interesting interviewing style that I think any of these guys have, and also a crazy variety of guests. So everything from like the best athletes in the world and their coaches, all the way through to physiologists, and that just kind of speaks to my biology background, and I love that kind of going into depth of like the psychology and physiology of performance.
Sort of more of an in-depth version of like what the Malcolm Gladwell tried to do with the because I feel like with Gladwell, I'm trying not to be too divisive here, but like he gets that one concept, he just nails the crap out of it home. Like here's another example to prove my point, right? Yeah. Where this sounds like it more be like just exploring a little bit more.
And I think as somebody who has their own podcast, listening to Michael Gervais interview, you'll be like, oh, that's a really interesting way to set up the conversation.
Oh, absolutely.
Velo News, because Velo News talks about coaching, cycling and all that stuff. And it's also run by a very, very close friend of mine, a guy called Chris Case. And so love to listen to him. He's a crazy smart guy, PhD neuroscientist who then became a journalist and now runs the part of the Velo News story, which is they produce the website, and he is somebody that I travel around the world with and cycle with, and he's just a really interesting guy. The other one that you should definitely listen to, just out of like complete hysteria, like if you just want to change the scene, is Armchair Expert.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so
I love these recommendations.
Yeah. So Dax Shepard, do you know him?
Oh, yeah. So as soon as you said that, the podcast that I go to for with lighting stuff up, I don't need to listen to Jocko Willink right now, is Conan O'Brien's.
Yeah.
And Dax was on, and those two were just...
Yeah, so Dax is amazing, and he's always got great guests. I always love what he has to say. And then there's, it's called Work Life by Adam Grant.
Okay.
So Adam Grant is the guy who wrote a bunch of books about, just careers and work and all that stuff. And then he partnered with TED. And again, really, really high value production stuff, like 20, 30 minutes of podcasting. And you're just like, whoa.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like I've got an MBA after that.
Wow, that's great.
And he's a great personality. He's just this kind of really interesting guy. So
I'll try and get some links together, but this is great. This is fantastic.
I've kind of dabbled with Tim Ferriss sometimes. He irritates me a little bit these days. And the Knowledge Project is something I've just started listening to. Shane Parrish.
I don't know. This is great.
Yeah. It's a little bit more in depth. Shane has a more it's almost like a Charlie Rose kind of thing, more investigative style. And, it's an hour of depth as opposed to the A16Z, which is kind of like
30 minutes.
30 minutes of just
boom.
like, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's very, very cool. And then tons of books on audio. So I that's my preference. I'll probably go through easy 40, 50 books a year.
That's great. Wow. Yeah. That's awesome. I do need to turn my speed up then. Not joking aside, but because
I'm, to that point, some of the feedback I got on that post that I put out there about, how I consume literature.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are like, well, it's not consuming, it's reading. And, they kind of make it out as if this is like arts versus science thing. Yeah. Look, if I'm reading a book just for the sake of reading it and it's fiction and I just want to enjoy it, I'm going to just read it at my own speed.
Right, you're going to put your pipe on and put your ass on and sit in
Exactly.
front of the fireplace.
Take my brandy, sniffed around.
I think exactly. I think mutual friends are Dave Balter and Sarah Hodges. They got into a big back and forth on this on Twitter where they were like, audiobook doesn't count as a real book, right? And then Katie from HubSpot, absolutely. And they're like, they just started going, but I'm like, knowledge is knowledge, right? So,
and again, it's like, it's these stupid umbrella terms that screw people up, right? If you are consuming a book for just the facts and the knowledge so that you can make better decisions, then it doesn't really matter how you consume it.
Right.
But if you're trying to lose yourself, the same thing with watching Netflix. If I watch a documentary on a certain thing, then I might skip through to the parts that I want or whatever. Whereas if it's the new Avengers movie or whatever, and I just want to lose myself.
Absolutely. Just turn the mind off.
Then I'll go to the Lux Theater and I get a big bag of popcorn and I'll just sit there and I'll be like, I drool on myself.
Oh, absolutely. And it's funny on that note because I'll go with my brother, he's a huge comics guy. We go to all those movies together and he's like, well, I didn't like how the plot, and I'm like, I don't even think of it. The mind is off.
Yeah.
It could be a Schwarzenegger movie. I don't care. I just want it to be entertainment.
Just enjoy it. And I think that's the whole point, is that not all these things are created equal.
Yeah.
The purposes for why you consume them are not equal. So just don't have a perspective. Just do what's appropriate.
Back to the diversification.
Yeah.
Awesome. This has been a blast.
Yeah, it has.
Went a little longer, but I really appreciate it, and this is great to catch up. It's good chatting with you.
Yeah,
awesome.
Thanks for coming down.
Oh, absolutely. Love the space.